And welcome to the Prescribing Prosperity Podcast with your hosts, John and Alex Soutsos. Gentlemen, good to see you.
Good morning, Bill. Always good to see you.
Howdy, Bill.
Hey, guys. I'm excited about today's episode because you have a guest, Chris Reynolds. He is the co-founder and he is the executive chair of Investment Planning Council. I'm not sure exactly what it is that means or what it does, but I do know that Chris also wrote a book called The Six Circle Strategy, and I do want to learn more about that. So I'm looking forward to today's episode. And with that, let me hand it over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Bill. Chris, great to see you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Alex. It's always great to be on a great podcast like this one.
Excellent. So I'd like to start by giving a little bit of background here. I've been licensed through Investment Planning Council for 27 years or so. And so I met Chris at least 27 years ago. And Chris has been in the financial services industry not as long as I have. I don't think anyone in the world has been in the industry as long as I have, but Chris has been in the industry close to as long as I have. And so, Chris, why don't you start off by telling us what motivated you to get into the financial services industry?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm going to say almost backed into it. I grew up actually on a horse farm. My dad trained horses. And so there was this guy who used to hang around the farm all the time, and he owned some racehorses. And, he'd wander in the middle of the day. He never seemed to work. He had a phone before anyone had a phone, those big Zach Morris phones.
Yeah.
He lived in this big 8,000 square foot house. And one day, I'm used to work, which is getting up early in the morning, looking after horses. So one day I'm like, what do you do for a living? And he said, I'm a financial advisor. And I'm like, I don't know what that is, but that's what I want to be. And I was about 15 years old at the time, and I started to read books about finance. I started to read books about entrepreneurs. I signed up for every accounting course and everything to do with math. And when I lived in Miami for a little while and then came back to Canada, and I saw a little ad for financial planning assistant. And I'm like, oh, I remember that guy. He was a financial advisor. And so I applied for that job. It was pretty much nothing more than a glorified telemarketer at the time. But, I took it and got my licenses. And as they say, the rest was history.
So, Chris, you got your license. So for the uninitiated out there, give us a little bit of background as to what the industry looked like at that time and where a financial advisor / financial planner fit into the industry.
Well, when I first started, I worked for a company called Empire Life. I actually was in the insurance business.
Yeah.
So I started in the insurance side, doing estate planning. And it was actually, at that time, I'm going to say it was pretty rudimentary. We would meet people, we'd look at their situation, we'd make recommendations, but we had pretty limited things that we could actually recommend to that client. A little bit later, a couple of years into it, I was thinking, you know what? Mutual funds. Mutual funds are the future. And to put in perspective, at that time, the entire mutual fund industry was about $30 billion when I first got into the mutual fund business. And today there's actual funds that have more than $30 billion. We're almost $1 trillion business here in the Canadian marketplace. We went from 30 million when I joined to almost $1 trillion here in the Canadian marketplace in that time period. So that's not saying I'm really old. I'm just saying how fast that business expanded in the Canadian marketplace.
And so you started Empire Life. How did you transition from Empire Life, or where did you transition from there? And how many years in were you?
I was only, not long. I'm going to say maybe 2 years in the insurance business. And then I was like, yeah, you know what? Investments, that's the future. During that time also, if you remember, that was the early 90s when, the recession was hitting in Canada.
Yeah.
And I was coming across a lot of people who needed help with retirement packages. They were getting laid off. And so I joined a company called Money Concepts way back then. I don't think it exists anymore, but
I remember them.
There wasn't actually that many companies at the time. It was
No.
starting to expand. They were starting to move at that point. So I went over there, and as I said, I continued to grow the business from there.
So you grew the business. How did you go from growing the business to starting the business?
Well, luckily, in any entrepreneur's journey, there's sort of that weird point that you come in your career where you're like, nah, you know what? I don't need to do it with other people. I can do it on my own. And actually, in my particular case, it came with an argument with management about, let's call it allocation of resources. And we had a somewhat of a disagreement. And I remember walking out of that room going, how hard could it be to run one of these things? I'm just going to go start my own.
Right.
Now, in hindsight, it was a lot harder than I thought, way harder. I had to go borrow money from big borrow and steal from everyone I ever met. For all the capital requirements. And, and at the beginning, when I started Investment Planning Council, it wasn't with any real grand vision. It was more or less, I loved being an advisor. I loved my clients. I loved helping them. And this was just a way that I could allocate my resources the way I wanted to, which is, giving them a great experience. And, from there, it just grew.
Now, I recall when I first met you, you said, IPC, or Investment Planning Council, was a firm designed by a financial advisor for financial advisors. So it was more of a flat hierarchy. It wasn't your typical pyramid hierarchy. So, Chris, you have served as CEO of Investment Planning Council for decades. You're in a different role now. But I have always had access to you, no matter what my position in the firm. I've always had access to you. I could email you, call you, and you'd respond, which is not typical of large organizations. So what was in your mindset when you took that approach?
Well, I think that all good businesses, forget the wealth management business, all good businesses start with the client. And in my particular case, John, Alex, you guys are my clients, right? So, I should be listening to what you want and trying to make it happen. And my job is to figure out what my clients need, why they need it, what problems they have, what unique things I can solve for them, and put them in place. So many companies, as you know, start at the top. And to your point, they go and design a product and then they go try to find somebody to sell it to. A way better thing is to find your client, solve their problem, and then find other clients like that. So, our founding principle as an organization was help advisors build a better business. Because if we help them build a better business, they could better service their clients. And so that was always our focus, and certainly my personal focus. And to this day, I still spend at least 50% of my time talking to my clients, talking to advisors all day long across this great country of ours, figuring out what's going well, what's going badly, and where should we focus our resources. Because I come back to that original argument that I had with why I left, and I don't want that happening here.
Did you start on your own, or did you have others involved?
There was a few, actually. Some are still with me to this day. Others have retired. I just actually had lunch with somebody who was retiring yesterday. There was actually only 7 of us when we started. In fact, my first Christmas party was in my apartment, and my apartment wasn't very big. Now we have, just combined, we'd have well over 1,000 employees. So that's not including advisors. So I'd need a big apartment to have my Christmas party there.
Exactly. So what was the first thing that you did, Chris, when you were thinking about starting a new business? I know you said looking out for financing. What were some of the other structures that you were looking to put into place at the time that you started the organization on your own?
Well, if you want to build a company, you can't do it on your own. That's for sure. And certainly my skill set is incredibly limited. So I had to find people with complementary skill sets in really all factions of the business. And I needed someone who knew how to do finance and books and raise money and all of those types of things. I needed someone who knew administration and technology and how to run those types of things. I need somebody out there, looking for new clients. And in my case, we did acquisitions. So looking for acquisitions. So, in my book, I talk about trust. You needed to build a team that you could trust, that they would do your job with very little supervision on your part. My job was basically, here's where we need to go, here's the problems we need to fix, but I'm not going to tell you how to fix them. You got to go So I think the biggest challenge that every business owner has is letting go, right? Everyone thinks, there's an expression. I talk about this. You ever hear this expression? If you want something done
Do it
right,
yourself.
you do it yourself. Yeah. That's literally the dumbest expression I could ever think of. If you want something done right, find somebody who actually knows how to do it and get them to do it, because everybody is better at everything than I am. And through my career, I've spent my entire career, at the end of the day, what you do as a CEO is develop talent, is having good people that you can trust who will do the job for you. And, there's some tough decisions that have to be made along the way, because you find out some people aren't delivering what they said they were going to deliver. But for the most part, that's the job of a business owner, is developing talent.
And so at what point did you relinquish your existing client base that you had built up to focus entirely on being the CEO of the organization?
It took me a while, because dealing with clients, I loved it, like loved it. I still talk to some of my clients from 30 years ago. Like, I have generations of clients that I talk to even to this day. These are your friends. These are people you care about. So it took a while. But early in the 2000s, and here's how I did it. Here's what happened. They had made some changes to the RESP rules, and I was telling a client this, and they corrected me. And I'm like, oh, I'm in big trouble if they're correcting me on how rule changes work. Now's the time to actually focus on building the company. So it was probably a good 7 years in before I finally cut the ties. And, I had a really good guy who worked with me who took over the business on that side, on the looking after my clients, so that I could focus on the business.
Yeah, that's definitely a challenging part about our business. Is there's always ongoing. It's never like the foundation is, poured in concrete, and once it settles, it settles. It's like you're on shifting sand, and the rules and the landscape is constantly changing and evolving, and you got to evolve and change with it. And so it stands to reason that once your attention started to be diverted, it made sense to try and step back and, focus on the large vision, the macro vision for the organization.
Well, I also, to go with that, I had a business coach, and he used to tell me a dog that chases two rabbits goes hungry.
Fair. That's very true.
That's a good metaphor. Excellent.
So what were some of the unexpected challenges that you faced, Chris? What were some of the things that you didn't foresee occurring along the way that you had to adapt to?
I think the biggest things that you never really know. Well, I say, my dad used this, you don't know what you don't know until you know it. And then you got to fix it right there. As I said, the challenges with things like regulation and, overcoming the constant change in regulation that happens, specifically in the Canadian market, it's certainly ongoing. So you could never have anticipated how much work that actually was to stay on side there. And also, it always comes down to the biggest challenge you're ever going to have always is people.
Right.
Business is people. And again, I'm going to talk about it in my book. One of the circles is relationships. And you can have good relationships and you can have bad relationships. So that is also a challenge. And then the other challenge that every business owner runs, at some point, you kind of lose focus sometimes. You build complexity. You try to serve too many masters, too many types of clients. Everyone goes through it, by the way. I've never seen anyone dodge that bullet, but it's how fast you learn that was not a good idea, and then you bring that complexity back to simplicity again. And so I think those are the big things that I've learned over the years: is keep things simple and focus on relationships.
And that's great advice. Did you make any mistakes or anything that you would do differently now with the benefit of hindsight?
Thousands and thousands and thousands of mistakes.
That's a separate book, right, Chris?
Exactly.
All the mistakes I made.
Book. 6 circles of mistakes that entrepreneurials make. I could literally teach a university course on things not to do. But if I had to group them, I would group them into, again, misjudging people, right? Getting back to relationships. I did some bad deals, and, my gut told me these are probably not good people, and this is probably not a good thing to do. So that was a big mistake and very costly, I can tell you, in a lot of different ways, both emotionally and financially. Hanging on to people who are not aligned to your vision, that is also a mistake. And again, it causes so much ripple effect that you don't really realize how big of a ripple effect until you get rid of them. And then it was, everybody's happy again, everyone's doing the right thing. And then the other big mistake is that sometimes you lose focus. Sometimes you forget the real reason you're in business. And that usually, again, teaches you a valuable lesson, and something bad has to happen, and then you become focused again.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Chris, the Investment Planning Council grew through acquisition. Can you elaborate somewhat on when this began for you, in what year, and what was your mindset when you came to that fork? You said, well, we're going to grow this way or that way, and we're going this way, and here's why.
No, it's a good question. And by the way, we've done 27 acquisitions over the years for different companies, but it probably wasn't as calculated as people might think. It started out as we looked at ourselves, and we were financial advisors who also ran a dealer. And we all said, which do we like doing better? And most of us said, we like being advisors way better than we like running these dumb dealers. And I'm like, there's got to be a whole bunch of people who are like this. And when I looked at that time in the what they call mutual fund dealer space, there was about 220 players in that space. And so between associations and people and in fact, we just called up other people who we knew were in a similar situation and say, do you like running this? And at that time, regulation was changing quite rapidly. And they hated it, by the way. Everyone I talked to, I hate it. And say, well, I got an idea for you. Why don't we get together? We'll take on all those administrative burdens. You can go back to being an advisor, and you can either get cash or shares in the company we're building. A lot took shares, luckily, and we just, that led to another one, that led to another one, that led to another one, and soon we had sort of a reputation in the business to the point where, if anyone was selling in the Canadian market, they'd at least have a conversation with us. Now, we weren't the only player in town, but we were the friendliest. So
definitely the friendliest.
So we started to make more and more friends.
For the people who are not in the financial services industry, can you define the difference between a dealer and then a financial advisory firm?
So a dealer is the licensed entity that financial advisors are registered through. So it's our responsibility as the dealer to oversee the activities of our various advisors across Canada. And so the regulators want that burden on the dealer, not on them. And so it's a regulatory thing. It's also a business thing, meaning you to process your business and all of your back office has to be centralized into one system. And also the producing of, so you got compliance, you got statements, and you like statements, regulatory statements, reporting, technology, operations. That's what makes up a dealership. By the way, boring business, boring business. This is why everyone hated them. It's great to be an advisor, but it's horrible to oversee compliance, technology, and operations. And so that's why, again, so many players didn't like being in that business. So we was like, we'll take that burden from you, and you can focus on doing what you like to do best.
Given how many deals you've done, does one stand out as being the most exciting?
Well, the one that I'm going to say launched us was a company called AFP. And the reason that was probably the one that launched us is they were owned by a company called ING, which I'm sure everyone's pretty familiar with, a huge insurance company from the Netherlands. And at that time, they had owned a company similar to ours. They had tried to get bigger, but they were proving difficulty and they needed more size. So we had convinced them to, sell us AFP in exchange for equity in our company and then put up more capital. And we utilize that capital to do further deals. So without that particular transaction and the backing of ING, I'm not sure we would have been where we are today.
That's incredible. I wasn't aware of that. I thought the company I was with was the most exciting and biggest deal you signed.
Well, it was exciting only because you were there, John. And
Yes, of
actually,
course.
John, we got a lot of good. And by the way, my assistant of 27 years also came from
That's
the
right.
company you were with,
Gail.
John. So Gail came from that. And probably I wouldn't be here or alive if it wasn't for my assistant. So,
Gail is a special person.
yes, she is.
So let's talk, Chris. You touched on it a little bit earlier. We're going to push in a little bit deeper on it. You said there were some deals that were stressful and that were challenging, and perhaps some that were that you felt in your gut were wrong at the time, and you wish you'd listened to your gut. Without, if you don't want to get into names, we don't have to get into names, but can you get into some more detail as to what happened and what led you to feel the way you did, where you said to yourself, you know what, I don't know that this is the right course of action at this point?
No, it's a great question. It's one that people can learn from. Is again, trust your gut. There was a smaller investment actually in the province of Quebec, and when you just meet people and you just think, I'm not sure if this is a good idea or not, and anyhow, it ended up being pushed through, and within a year. Through one of our audits, we found out they were doing things that they shouldn't have been doing, and we went and reported it, and we, basically shut the whole thing down, and then we got in trouble from the regulators that we should have caught it earlier. And I'm like, but so what does it tell you? What the lesson I learned? Business is people, and if you have any doubts whatsoever of the people you're getting into business with, it's better just not to do it. Your gut is usually right.
And so did that deal actually close and you had to unwind the deal, or were you able to pull the plug on it? What was the outcome?
We ended up pulling the plug and saving the assets and basically firing everybody.
Okay.
So, there was some saving to it, but it was an expensive lesson to learn by everybody.
Right. And I don't know if this is the same acquisition. My understanding was that there was a time when, correct me if I'm wrong, was it IPC was almost bought by somebody? Dad, remember you were talking about this when we met, when we had lunch a couple of weeks ago with Andrew and Steven.
Well, I don't know about IPC. IPC was eventually bought by somebody, but
yes.
No, I was referring to the dealer I belonged to before joining IPC.
Okay.
Was almost bought by two organizations, and Chris is familiar with both of them. And one of them, we went to the altar and got stood up. So that was I you know who I'm talking about.
But that was good for us. So
yes,
it ended up to be bad for them and good for us.
But I believe at that time, Chris, you guys almost bought them as well at some point, or were in consideration to buy them. And then that deal fell apart, or you chose not to go through with it. Was that this situation, or was that?
Well, I'll put it this way. I don't think that there's anybody in the Canadian space that we haven't talked to about acquisition at some point. Even the very large players, at some point, we've been in discussion, as one of the major consolidators in the space. And by the way, it was a big space. Remember how I said there was 220 companies in the space at the time that we started? Today, there is less than 30 if you take the banks away.
Wow.
So that's how consolidated that business has become between, companies just leaving altogether or being bought.
Right. And how do you see it evolving in the near future? I know I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but I'm just kind of curious at the point where we're discussing this, that given that how much the industry has consolidated over the last, 20 plus 30 years, how do you see the industry evolving in the near future? How do you see the banks and the independents and even the mutual fund companies? I think that's kind of the biggest one that jumps to mind for me. Is the mutual fund companies used to be major players in the industry, and they've really fallen off to the side, and they've had to evolve and adapt their business. And I don't know if they've successfully done so, or if it is still a work in progress for a lot of them. So I'll turn it over to you and let you answer.
Well, I think if I look forward, I think we're going to see a lot more what I call organic growth in the Canadian industry on the what I call independent financial advice side, because that's what people are looking for. People want independent financial advice. Generally, they like working with entrepreneurs. They like people who are objective and they can look at their whole situation. I think the day of like banks with, straight on product sales is what they're doing, right? They're just trying to sell you something. I think those days have come to an end. But people seeking advice, I think, will continue to expand. And if we were to contrast Canada to the United States, in Canada, believe it or not, only 13% of the market is with the independent financial advisors. In the United States, it's closer to 35%. So there's a huge gap of market that is still available for the independent advisor. And as banks, again, continue to focus more on product sales and not as much on the client relationships and the client experiences and giving great advice, I think that will lead to more and more clients moving to seeking out independent financial advisors.
I think it's the dynamic of the Canadian marketplace that creates that difference in that the banks are ubiquitous in Canada or in every street corner in the country, and people have grown up with the banks. And unlike the US, we have 6 or 7 very large banks, and that's it. And actually, most of the financial assets are concentrated in the big 5. Whereas in the States, it's a more fractured banking system, and people don't have the same intuitive trust of those large institutions. So here in Canada, there is a greater incentive, perhaps, to seek out some independent thought compared to how it has evolved differently in the U.S. But I want to transition to the issue of entrepreneurship. Now, you've been in the C-suite for a long time now. You're very far removed from the days when you were an entrepreneur. Can you explain a little bit about how that transition went for you, and how do you feel today? Do you feel like you're a suit, or you still feel like you're the same person you were 35 years ago?
Well, I'm not sure that anyone ever defined me as a suit.
Yeah, I've never seen you wear a suit, Chris, in my life.
Yeah, I own one somewhere, but somewhere. But so I'll put it a different way. Did I like, being CEO? I loved the growth part of the CEO, and again, developing talent and developing the structure and the people. But my real true passion, what I love, is helping advisors build their business. Like if I had to, there's 3 things I like doing, which is basically my role today. I like talking to advisors and helping them build their business. I like doing deals. Right? So we just acquired another company just recently, and I got 3 more on the go. So I like doing that, and I like working on big picture strategy. Like I'm a big picture. Where are we going? What resources do we need? Where do we focus our direction? And so that's what I'm doing now with the much bigger organization, as Canada Life has acquired IPC. That now, as a company that has about 130, actually, as the other day, $135 billion of assets, we can make a very big dent in this industry.
And so when did you feel as though you had made it? Or to put it differently, when did you feel as though the organization had reached a stable level?
I don't know if that ever happens. Meaning, you get to different, I'm going to say, levels of success. And certainly, I guess when we're in the top, we're in top 3 now of companies in Canada, you can say that's success. But I actually don't. I think that there's still so much opportunity in the market and so much opportunity to continue to deliver world-class client experiences to Canadians and give them good advice. So I think that if there's ever a time that you think you've peaked, that's probably the end of your career, right? You always have to think there's another mountain to climb. In fact, again, I'll go back to my book. I talk about every hero needs a quest. Every hero needs the next quest and the next quest. So, we certainly have hit certain benchmarks. I'm proud at IPC was almost 40 billion when we sold to Canada Life. And that was, again, started a company that I started, as I said, we had a Christmas party in my apartment. So you'd think that's some level of success, but I would say there's so much more opportunity that we have to develop and how we can help Canadians.
Right, absolutely, and I think that's a great answer, and it's always nice to have that next frontier to chase. And so, one last one here before we wrap up this first episode, Chris. I just wanted to get your perspective. What is it about the deal that is so enticing and so exciting that makes it such a high that you're always chasing?
It's a good question, but it's I remember listening to one of my heroes, Warren Buffett, talk about business is an intellectual pursuit. And when you do an acquisition, it's an intellectual pursuit. There's so many different moving parts. There's the part of, is it a good deal? What are the numbers? What can you do? What does the other side have to have? Who are their clients? How does that fit into us? How do you develop synergies? What's going to be a benefit? Then you have to communicate all of that to all of the contingencies on the other side. The last one we did, D. Thomas, and fantastic. And Tony, I've known, like, people are like, oh, that's a great deal. I'm like, I've known Tony for 20 years. I've been knocking on his door for 20 years. And for 20 years, we've had dinner together. And then on the 19th year, he's like, this would be a good idea. And
You got your white whale.
that happens. There's a nice $3 billion organization that Tony and I share the same principles. We share the same values. Like, I think it's going to be fantastic.
Perfect. Well, that's a great way to wrap this one up, Bill. I'll turn it back over to you to drive us home.
Well, before we drive home, I do want to tease the fact that this is only part one of a two-part interview. What are we going to get into in the next part of this interview? Because there are a lot of questions I have hanging out there, and I'm sure a lot of listeners are thinking, "Hey, wait a minute! Oh, we don't go away so fast." So, where are we going next, guys?
Absolutely. Well, we're going to discuss what qualities are required for a successful entrepreneur. We're going to discuss Chris's book, The Six Circle Strategy. That's going to be the big one, and then we're also going to wrap up just with another brief discussion on how we see the financial services industry evolving in the future. I've got some more thoughts to share on that as well, and so we'll touch on all three of those things and go from there.
That's excellent, because this is a fantastic and extremely interesting conversation. I look forward to part two. Before we get out of here, though, John, Alex, if anybody's listening to this and they don't already have a relationship with you and think maybe they should or want to, what's the best way for them to reach out and get a hold of you?
Best ways for them to visit our website, which is medwealth.ca. That's med-wealth.ca, or send us an email at info@medwealth.ca.
Excellent. And if you want to be sure to hear part two of this discussion where we talk about the secret, the making of a successful entrepreneur and the Six Circle Strategy, do this. Hit the follow button and become a subscriber. That's simple. The beauty of that is you're now a subscriber, and the next time the episode drops, you'll be alerted and you can give that a listen. I would also ask, look, if you like this podcast, if you find it interesting, tell people about it, give it a like, let people know, because word of mouth promotion, especially these days, is really invaluable, and we would very much appreciate it. So until next time, I'm Bill Tucker. On behalf of John and Alex and everybody at MedWealth Financial, thank you for taking the time to listen today. We'll catch you next time.